In this moment, one of our closest, most reliable, and arguably most steadfast allies in Europe, Denmark, just officially called the United States a major national security threat.
Yeah. And not just, a difficult partner.
Right.
Not a competitor on trade. A threat. We're talking about a formal annual intelligence outlook. This is from the Danish Defense Intelligence Service, one of their key espionage agencies.
So this is serious.
Oh, absolutely. Their 2025 report makes this classification. And for the first time anyone can remember, they've explicitly put the United States, their NATO ally, for decades, right alongside known adversaries.
You mean
like China and Russia. In terms of potential national security risk, that is a seismic, an alliance-breaking kind of declaration.
what the heck is happening to our standing in the world? Because this isn't some op-ed, in a newspaper. It's not a political tweet that's going to disappear tomorrow. This is a core intelligence document. It's meant to guide Danish defense policy, their military, for the next year.
It signals a complete internal a reevaluation of an alliance that has been, rock solid, seemingly unshakable since NATO was founded.
Generations ago.
Absolutely. And the source material we're looking at today, it's this Danish report, but also internal security strategy drafts from the current U.S. administration and allied diplomatic cables. It doesn't just give us this one shocking headline.
Okay.
It helps us unpack the three core areas of U.S. foreign policy right now that have led directly to this breakdown.
So our mission today, it feels urgent. We need to cut through all the noise and really understand the shift because it's happening right now.
It is.
We're going to focus first on that, just the sheer depth of this loss of trust, how one of our closest friends started, managing us like a hostile power. Second, we'll get into the active hostility from Washington toward international law, specifically targeting the International Criminal Court.
And that part is.
Yeah.
It's really something else.
And maybe most critically, we'll look at the strategic, documented push to actively dismantle these collective defense structures.
Yeah.
Things like NATO and the European Union that have stood for decades.
That last point, the idea of intentionally destroying the very framework that guaranteed peace in Europe, it's hard to even say out loud.
It sounds unbelievable.
But it's explicitly laid out in the documents, in the strategies we have. This isn't just like passive neglect. It's an active adversarial foreign policy.
Okay, so let's unpack this. Let's start with Section 1. How an ally officially turned into a threat. How they put the U.S. on the same risk list as Moscow and Beijing.
Right. We have to start by just appreciating the gravity of what Denmark is saying here.
Sure.
When you think of NATO's founding members, Denmark is, the model of stability. They're a quiet, effective partner. Their relationship with the U.S., especially in things like intelligence sharing, Arctic defense, it's been pretty much unshakable.
Right, you just don't hear about problems with Denmark.
Yeah. You don't. So to have their Defense Intelligence Service, in a formal report, tell their own government that the U.S. is a potential security threat, that sends this high-level alarm bell right into the heart of the alliance.
And the report's core finding, it's not vague, right? It's not about a specific person.
No, it's about policy.
It signals this drastic change because, and I'm quoting here, the U.S. is increasingly prioritizing its own interests and doing that at the explicit expense of its partners. That seems to be the core of it.
That's the shift.
A shift from mutual benefit to just unilateral gain.
That's the philosophical change, yeah.
Yeah.
But the report goes further. It details the practical application of this. It focuses specifically on how the United States is seen as a threat.
And how is that?
It says the U.S. is actively using its economic and technological strength as a tool of power against allies and partners.
Okay, wait a minute. That economic and technological strength, the power of the U.S. economy, Silicon Valley, the dollar, wasn't that the foundation of the whole global order that was supposed to benefit our allies?
Precisely. And that is exactly why this is so chilling. Just think about the long-term implication of weaponizing those tools. We're not just talking about using them against China or Russia. We're talking about weaponizing the very things that were meant to create cooperation.
Like what?
Like sanctions architecture, tech export controls, access to the U.S. financial system, and turning them against our own partners.
So it turns a shared advantage into geopolitical blackmail.
That's a good way to put it.
If you're an ally, say Germany or Denmark, and you know that the global leader you depend on for security is willing to use its financial power against you the second your interests don't align.
Right.
Over a trade dispute or some infrastructure project.
Right.
that just completely changes the basic calculation of your relationship.
It does.
You can't rely on shared values anymore. You have to constantly negotiate from a position where you're economically vulnerable.
And this is precisely why the classification changes from, say, challenging partner, which is a normal diplomatic thing.
Sure, everyone's a challenging partner sometimes.
Exactly. But it moves from that to security threat. A security threat, in intel terms, is something you have to actively hedge against. You have to defend yourself from it, even if that threat comes from someone who is nominally a friend.
So when cooperation is replaced by just transactional self-interest?
The risk to your economy, your infrastructure, your stability, it becomes existential. This report is Denmark signaling that they now have to build defenses against U.S. policy actions, not just, Russian submarines.
And this is where it gets really specific and frankly kind of wild. It ties this general economic threat directly to Danish national sovereignty. The report doesn't just talk in hypotheticals, it names Greenland.
It does, which is fascinating because it links this abstract strategic policy to a very, very concrete piece of geography.
What does it say?
The Danish report states clearly that the U.S. poses a specific threat to Denmark's sovereignty over Greenland. And Greenland, we should remember, is an autonomous territory within the Kingdom of Denmark.
And the reason for this? The report says the threat comes directly from the U.S.'s growing interest in Greenland, which is driven by heightened great power rivalry in the Arctic.
Yeah, and we need to understand the history here to really get why Denmark is so alarmed. The U.S. has been interested in Greenland for a long time for a strategic reason.
Of course.
But that interest just exploded in 2019 when the previous administration tried to buy Greenland.
I remember that. It was treated almost like a joke here, but
not in Denmark. They've rejected it as, absurd and deeply disrespectful. So now, that interest, when you combine it with the current administration's transactional America First policy, is seen through a completely different lens.
It brings this abstract geopolitical tension right down to the domestic level for an ally. The U.S. interest in the Arctic is a core strategic priority for us. It's about power projection, securing resources, getting an edge on Russia and China as the ice recedes. But when that core U.S. interest means pressuring an ally, economically or otherwise, to give up territory, it validates that fear. The fear that the U.S. will just sacrifice allied relationships for its own self-serving goal.
It absolutely validates that fear. For Denmark, this isn't about a trade negotiation anymore. It's about their national integrity, their territorial sovereignty. When a great power starts fixating on a piece of your sovereign territory because of its own rivalry with someone else and is willing to use its economic and tech strength to push the issue, well, that great power has crossed the line. It's become a threat to your sovereignty.
So this specific geographic tension, it just underscores the reality that the U.S. administration views these historical alliances not as partnerships, but as resources, things to be leveraged or pressured or just thrown away based on whatever the immediate interest is.
That's it, exactly.
So we have an administration with policy that is increasingly transactional, using its power as a tool for coercion and openly threatening the sovereignty of its closest allies. If Denmark, a country that's, famously quiet, stable, a committed NATO member, if they are sounding the alarm this loudly, it suggests a profound breakdown, not just of trust, but of the very stability of the international rules-based order.
The order that the U.S. itself designed and championed after World War II.
The very same one.
It suggests that order is fraying, and it's fraying fast. And that lack of respect for global rules, it leads us right into our second major finding from the sources.
Which is?
The administration's aggressive, open hostility toward the International Criminal Court, the ICC. This hostility shows that when international law gets in the way of personal or political interests, this administration is prepared to burn the whole institution of law right down to the ground.
Okay, setting the scene here, we have to just state the core fact. The U.S. is openly hostile to the International Criminal Court.
Openly and aggressively.
This is the global body that was created to prosecute individuals for war crimes, for genocide, crimes against humanity. And the U.S. is treating it like an enemy, even though we aren't even a full member.
Right. We signed the Rome Statute but never ratified it.
Can you just quickly clarify the Rome Statute for anyone listening who might not be deep into international law?
Of course.
Yeah.
The Rome Statute is the treaty that established the ICC. President Clinton signed it, but the Senate never ratified it. So the U.S. isn't a formal member state. And that generally means U.S. citizens are outside the ICC's jurisdiction. Unless...
There's always an unless.
There is. Unless they commit crimes on the territory of a member state, or if the UN Security Council refers a case. It's complex. But the hostility we're seeing, according to these sources, is very personal and very immediate.
And the supposed motivation. The sources cite a growing concern that the ICC will, maybe as early as 2029, turn its attention to Donald Trump, the vice president, the secretary of war, and others for potential prosecutions.
Oh, yes. The source material uses this term AGs, high-level executive group. It seems to be internal administration jargon. And the sources use extremely strong language, reflecting the viewpoint that's driving this aggressive U.S. stance. They talk about fears of prosecutions for being war criminals. It's important for you to know we're reflecting the language used in the sources to describe this fear.
That is just a staggering implication, that a sitting or prospective administration would move to threaten, to sanction, to actively try and dismantle a global court, just out of fear of personal accountability.
For war crimes, genocide, or other high crimes, yes.
And the source details 3, what it calls non-negotiable demands that the regime is making to the ICC, communicating them very clearly to the court and also to our allies.
And these demands are just. They're unprecedented. They're so audacious. They're essentially demanding the world rewrite international law to protect a few specific American officials.
Okay, what's the first demand?
The first is an immediate charter amendment.
What does that mean?
It means the ICC must immediately amend its founding document, the Rome Statute, to prohibit any and all war crimes investigations into Donald Trump and his top officials, these so-called HEGs.
That is extraordinary. They're demanding a change to the foundational document of an international treaty they haven't even ratified.
Correct.
That's not diplomacy. That's asking the world to completely restructure its entire system of international justice, just to grant preemptive absolute immunity for specific American political figures.
It is the ultimate expression of unilateral power. Dictate global rules for your own immediate personal benefit, and don't worry about the consequences for the court's legitimacy or, the rule of law itself.
And a treaty amendment, that's a huge process.
Right. It's long, it's arduous. It requires consensus among dozens and dozens of member states to demand it be done immediately and under threat. It's like treating the ICC as if it were a subsidiary of the State Department.
And the second demand. This one focuses on a very current, very hot-button issue.
It does. The second demand is that the ICC must drop all investigations and all claims against Israeli leaders, specifically concerning potential actions in Gaza.
So this is demanding the court halt justice proceedings based entirely on U.S. political preference in a major ongoing conflict.
Exactly. This goes way beyond just protecting Americans. This is using America's position to shield the leaders of a key non-NATO ally from any international scrutiny.
And the third demand seems to be about cleaning up the past, wiping the slate clean.
That's a good way to put it. The third demand is that the ICC must formally end the earlier probe into U.S. troops over their actions in Afghanistan. That investigation was a huge source of tension during the previous administration. So this demand is about retroactively clearing the books for any alleged past conduct.
Ensuring no U.S. personnel, military or civilian, ever face accountability for actions they committed in ICC member territories.
Right.
So you take those 3 demands together: immunity for U.S. officials, political interference in the Gaza probe, and erasing the Afghanistan probe. It paints a very clear picture.
The very unified one.
This is an administration demanding that the ICC become completely subservient to U.S. political and military interests. Or, just cease to function as an independent court.
And that brings us to the consequences. What happens if the ICC says no? What's the threat that Washington is making if the court doesn't meet these non-negotiable demands?
And it's not just a diplomatic slap on the wrist.
Not at all. It's an active, explicit campaign to destroy a global legal institution.
The sources say that if the ICC doesn't act immediately, Washington threatens severe, direct action. The U.S. will sanction and attack the International Criminal Court as an organization.
And then the threats get intensely personal. They get, frankly, deeply disturbing.
Yeah.
The documents state that the U.S. may penalize more ICC officials, and specifically that the U.S. will, and this is a quote, go after their judges, go after their prosecutors, and try to ruin their lives in the United States of America.
That is announcing a policy of judicial warfare. A country that historically championed the rule of law is now threatening to target, isolate, and financially destroy the private lives of judges and lawyers.
Who are just trying to uphold international law against the most heinous crimes imaginable.
It's such a sharp contrast. The historical U.S. role as the architect of global stability versus this current role as a primary threat to global justice.
And it raises this profound question for our allies who are watching all this happen right after Denmark has classified the U.S. as a threat.
Right.
If the U.S. is willing to destroy an international body dedicated to holding people accountable for war crimes just to protect its own officials, what rule of law will the U.S. respect on the world stage?
And the answer, according to these sources, seems to be a purely self-serving one. Which brings us to the most concerning part of this whole assessment.
The active official U.S. policy to destroy NATO and the EU.
This is where everything converges. The Danish threat assessment, the hostility to the ICC, the whole transactional blueprint. It all comes together here. We're moving from just pressure and hostility to an explicit, formal policy aimed at dismantling the very architecture that's kept Europe stable and at peace since the Cold War.
We have to focus on the Trump regime's 2025 national security strategy. That's the document that details these destructive aims. The source material says, without any ambiguity, that it is now formal United States policy to engage in these highly adversarial actions against institutions the U.S. itself helped create.
And these policies are not subtle at all. They're aimed right at the foundations of the Western alliance. First, the strategy explicitly aims to destroy the EU. It commits the U.S. to supporting far right-wing extremist groups, whose goal is the dissolution of the European Union.
And you have to grasp how critical this is. It's a complete 180-degree turn in U.S. grand strategy. Historically, the U.S. poured immense political, diplomatic, financial capital into creating a unified, stable Europe.
It was the main counterweight to the Soviets and later Russia.
Exactly, and now official U.S. policy is committed to fragmentation. They are actively funding and promoting and legitimizing internal political movements, many of them openly hostile to liberal democracy, whose main goal is to tear the continent's union apart.
So it's using domestic politics as a weapon of foreign policy against an ally.
That's precisely what it is.
And the strategy also targets the core military alliance, NATO. It seeks to destroy NATO as a permanent organization. It wants to undermine the very idea of NATO as a permanent standing and extending organization.
The word permanence is the key there.
Right.
Because if the U.S. manages to make NATO purely transactional, where the defense guarantee, Article 5, is just something you buy and sell based on, who paid what this quarter.
Instead of a collective principle.
Right. Then the alliance immediately stops being a reliable defense. It just becomes a system of temporary self-interested deals that a country like Russia can easily exploit. They can pick off members one by one. The official U.S. policy is to remove that crucial permanence and predictability that defines a real collective defense alliance.
And to tie these two goals together, destroying the EU and NATO, the policy explicitly supports dividing Europe and doing regime change there.
It's not just passive indifference to European unity. It's an active foreign policy designed to sow chaos and division among our oldest partners, to replace their existing governments with ones that are more pliable to Washington's demands.
The strategy is fundamentally about replacing reliable, democratic allies with transactional partners, no matter what their ideology is.
And the source highlights the direct, documented support for specific far-right groups. The section in the source material actually calls it the Putin puppet strategy.
And the most glaring example cited is Germany's AfD, the Alternative for Germany party.
Far-right, openly pro-Putin, deeply hostile to the EU. The source notes that the leader of the AfD is getting a red carpet welcome and is scheduled to be the keynote speaker at a major New York Republican Party annual convention.
That goes so far beyond normal diplomatic engagement.
Oh, it's way beyond. This is using the American political machine to intentionally legitimize and elevate foreign political actors whose interests align directly with our adversaries, like Russia. The AfD has always advocated for easing sanctions on Russia for getting out of the EU.
So by propping up groups like the AfD in Germany, or the Reform Party in the UK, or Le Pen's party in France,
all of which are mentioned in the source,
the US administration is actively creating what the source calls a Europe in total dysfunction.
It's an internal geopolitical Trojan horse. You empower those inside your allies' borders who want to tear down the alliance from within. And this is why Danish intelligence sees the U.S. as an active threat.
Right, not just some distant power.
The U.S. is essentially funding and supporting Copenhagen's internal political enemies.
And this whole strategy of dismantling collective defense, it just ignores the foundational principles that kept the peace for so long.
And we actually have commentary from John Bolton within the source material that analyzes the philosophy behind all this. And he's brutally honest about the decision-making process, or lack thereof.
Bolton confirms that the leader at the top doesn't even engage with these documents, including this explosive 2025 security strategy.
He says Trump never read the strategy documents, that he doesn't have a coherent philosophy or design for American national security.
That's a crucial distinction for you listening to this. The dangerous policies we're seeing, dismantling NATO, threatening the ICC, they aren't the result of some grand, complex geopolitical strategy.
No, they're the result of the impulsive transactional whims of a leader who sees international relations as a series of simple business deals, who doesn't even read the documents that are supposed to guide global strategy. So the policies are just designed to appease those whims, regardless of the long-term strategic damage.
And this feeds directly into his view of NATO, which confirms all those Danish fears. Bolton notes the policy is guided by this very narrow lens. The U.S. defends Europe, we get nothing out of it, and they don't pay for it.
And that view just fundamentally misunderstands what a collective defense alliance is. The benefit of NATO isn't a quarterly dividend check paid to Washington.
Right.
The benefit is 7 decades of peace and stability, bought through the sheer deterrent power of the alliance. By replacing that deep strategic policy with impulsive financial transactions, Bolton argues, the administration is deliberately inviting instability.
And this transactional impulse, it leads directly into the next big concept the regime is pushing in its strategy, reverting to spheres of influence.
Yeah, subsection 3.2 goes deep into this concept of spheres of influence from the National Security Report. And it's just a complete repudiation of the idea of sovereign nations freely choosing their own alliances.
You have to remember, this concept hasn't been formal U.S. policy since Yalta, where the great powers just carved up Europe.
Pretty much.
So this new policy, it fundamentally redivides the world according to the interests of the 3 big powers, the U.S., China, and Russia. How does this new map of the world look?
Under this proposed deal, Europe is classified entirely as Russia's sphere of influence.
All of Europe.
All of Europe. Asia, and they specifically name our allies Japan and Taiwan, belongs exclusively to China. And the Western Hemisphere, Canada, Mexico, all of South America, that belongs to the U.S.
This is just, it's shocking.
Cool.
Because it treats our established, wealthy, democratic, sovereign allies
like Japan, like the nations of Europe.
It's not as independent countries, but as vassal states that belong to our rivals. It just eliminates the whole idea of an alliance by free choice.
It's an intellectual throwback to 19th century realpolitik. It completely erases the sovereignty gains of the 20th century. The U.S. is basically saying to Europe, you're Russia's problem now, and telling China, you can have Japan and Taiwan.
Which not only violates our existing treaties and defense pacts, but guarantees a dramatic, catastrophic shift in the global balance of power. We'd be deliberately abandoning key partners to our adversaries.
And if official U.S. policy is to abandon our allies to the spheres of influence of our main rivals, well, it's instantly clear why a small country like Denmark, right there on the edge of Europe, feels an immediate and existential threat from Washington.
They're being handed over to Russia.
And this strategic shift is immediately and tragically visible in the most active conflict zone in the world today, Ukraine. Our source material details this immediate, active pressure campaign to force Ukraine to surrender. It's the real-world application of the spheres of influence policy.
So under this doctrine, Ukraine has already been classified as belonging to Russia.
Already done.
Okay, let's start with the military context to ground this. The sources note that even with all the help Russia is getting from North Korea, China, Belarus, Iran, they've only managed to gain about 0.77% of Ukrainian territory since the start of 2025.
A fraction of a percent.
A tiny fraction.
And this minimal gain is coming at a massive, unsustainable cost for Moscow. Russia is suffering disproportionately high personnel costs. The calculation in the source material is stark.
What is it?
At this rate, Russia would need to lose 30 million soldiers and spend over 100 years to occupy Ukraine. The war, based on military reality, is simply unwinnable for Moscow if Ukraine continues to get full support.
That military assessment is crucial. It means Russia cannot win on the battlefield against a unified, supported Ukraine.
Correct.
Therefore, the only way for Russia to get significant territory is if the U.S. forces Ukraine to surrender politically, leveraging our position to dictate the terms.
And that is exactly where the Trump envoys come in. The sources highlight the involvement of Jared Kushner and his business partner, Steve Witkoff. And the key detail here is that both of them are cited as having no foreign policy experience.
And sending envoys with no diplomatic experience sends a very specific message.
It does. It says this isn't diplomacy. This is a business deal. We're here to cut a deal, and we don't care about the ethical or strategic cost.
Exactly. And these individuals representing that transactional focus were sent to deliver a shocking demand directly to Ukrainian President Zelensky.
And what was that demand?
The sources detail that these envoys demanded that Zelensky consent to cede all of Donbas, the entire eastern part of Ukraine, during a December call.
Wow.
And crucially, this demand was made shortly after Kushner and Witkoff met with Putin in Moscow. The sources note that the details of their proposed surrender deal reportedly got worse, meaning more favorable to Russia after that meeting.
The implication is unmistakable. A surrender deal was basically dictated by the aggressor, Russia, refined by the U.S. envoys, and then pushed aggressively onto the victim, Ukraine. All while the U.S. officially classifies Ukraine as belonging in Russia's sphere of influence.
The transactional nature is just laid bare. The source quotes Garry Kasparov, who says the administration pressures and insults Zelensky and Ukraine, the victim, for the genocidal invader-only concession and business deals.
It's a complete abandonment of the principle that aggression should never be rewarded. And the practical effect of this policy, it's already measurable. And it's shocking.
How so?
The Kiel Institute for World Economy Tracker, which, for you listening, is widely seen as the most objective, real-time measure of aid to Ukraine, it shows the immediate impact since this current regime took office.
And that impact is?
America has provided zero support to Ukraine since Trump took office. Zero. Leaving Europe to provide all of the support.
That one data point zero support, it just quantifies the entire shift from collective defense to active betrayal. It forces our European allies, who are already strained, to bear the entire burden of defense against Russia. It effectively punishes them for upholding the very principles of sovereignty the U.S. once championed.
Which goes directly back to the Danish intelligence assessment. The U.S. is actively working to dismantle the stability of its allies.
This is the unifying theme we see across all the sources, from Denmark's report listing the U.S. as a threat, to the demands on the ICC, to the explicit strategy to destroy the EU and NATO, and finally, to this Ukraine surrender pressure.
It's all one coherent, if destructive, picture. The U.S. regime is systematically treating its historical allies and international agreements as expendable tools to advance immediate, unilateral interests. And it's a strategy that our allies, like Denmark, now see as a direct security threat. It leaves them exposed, vulnerable, and subject to Washington's whims.
And this isn't just about, dusty foreign policy papers. As Bolton pointed out, these policies are driven by impulse, not by some grand design. This is about the rapid, visible erosion of the global institutions and the trust that have underpinned decades of stability and security.
The so what, for you, the listener, is enormous. When the policy of the world's only superpower is to actively support the destruction of the EU, to turn its back on NATO, and to threaten the very bodies that prosecute war criminals. It fundamentally impacts the stability of global trade, defense agreements, and any kind of collective action.
Every country now has to hedge against us.
Every country has to hedge against potential future U.S. policy actions, rather than rely on the promises of an alliance.
And the ultimate question we're left with is this immediate challenge to sovereignty. What is the ultimate cost of replacing the idea of a collective defense alliance based on shared values and mutual security with a policy based purely on these transactional spheres of influence that just abandons allies to our rivals?
If the U.S., the leader that built this whole system, is the first one to abandon the rules, if it actively threatens to sanction international judges or use its economic might against Denmark, then global stability just rests on the unpredictable whims of transactional leaders, not on the reliable foundation of international law.
What happens to American influence when our allies officially have to manage the U.S. as a potential security threat? If the world's most powerful country is seen mainly as a source of self-serving chaos, how long until other powers step in to fill that leadership vacuum? Or worse, decide to follow our cynical, unilateral, transactional lead? That's the dangerous, uncertain world this shift is creating for all of us.
And something for you to consider as you track all of this. When an intelligence service classifies its longtime military partner as a national security threat, they don't just write a report and file it away.
Right.
They immediately start planning defensive contingencies against that threat. That means potential military repositioning, economic countermeasures, political hedging. The shift from ally to threat is already driving policy changes around the world and the ramifications. We'll be feeling them for decades to come.
Indeed, and we'll be here to track those ramifications as they unfold.